Tonight, the growing calls for President Trump's removal after he incited the assault on the Capitol that left 4 dead. Top Democrats demanding Vice President Pence invoke the 25th Amendment to remove the president from office after one of the darkest days in American history. A wave of resignations in his inner circle. The first cabinet member stepping down tonight. The president finally agreeing to an orderly transition of power, but could Democrats impeach him again? Inside the siege, new images and new first-hand accounts. The congressman holding a colleague's hand as violent Trump supporters storm the heart of our democracy. The search for the rioters, authorities asking for the public's help. Dozens now charged, and what we've learned about this man putting his feet on a desk in Nancy Pelosi's office. Capitol Police under fire for the massive breach. President-elect Biden's strong words condemning the mob that tried to subvert his victory as domestic terrorists. And our NBC News investigation into the dark web fueling this rise of extremism in America. Were warnings missed?
This is NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt.
Good evening, everyone. We woke up to a different country today, one that can no longer easily turn its back to the poison that has seeped from the Oval Office, nor the radicalization it fomented that exploded in fury in that stomach-turning assault on the U.S. Capitol and on our Congress yesterday. And now the fallout, resignations from the president's inner circle, loyalties tested, his public voice virtually silenced by social media companies, and somber discussions, frankly, none of us could have imagined in the waning days of any presidency. Calls for Donald Trump's immediate removal from office. Kristen Welker begins our reporting.
Tonight, President Trump huddled behind closed doors as a cascade of administration officials say they've had enough, including his special envoy to Northern Ireland, former Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney.
I can't stay here. Not after yesterday. You can't look at that yesterday and think I want to be a part of that in any way, shape, or form.
Now, the first cabinet member has resigned, Transportation Secretary Elaine Chao, all of it following the overnight departure of the First Lady's Chief of Staff and the Deputy National Security Advisor. And then there's the condemnation from one-time allies, including former Attorney General Bill Barr, blasting the president's conduct as a betrayal of his office and supporters, and from Senator Lindsey Graham.
All I can say is count me out. Enough is enough. I've tried to be helpful.
This morning, hours after praising the rioters who ransacked the Capitol, a shift in tone from the president, who released a statement through a spokesperson with Twitter and Facebook suspending his accounts. The president saying, quote, "Even though I totally disagree with the outcome of the election, nevertheless, there will be an orderly transition on January 20th. But even with just days left in President Trump's term, top Democrats tonight are saying that's not enough, demanding he be removed from office now through the 25th Amendment.
If the Vice President and the Cabinet do not act, the Congress may be prepared to move forward with impeachment.
One Republican joining in.
The president is unmoored from reality and from his oath.
President-elect Joe Biden.
He unleashed an all-out assault on our institutions of our democracy from the outset. And yesterday was but the culmination of that unrelenting attack.
Tonight, the president tweeting out this video.
To those who engaged in the acts of violence and destruction, you do not represent our country. A new administration will be inaugurated on January 20th. My focus now turns to ensuring a smooth, orderly, and seamless transition of power.
Now, sources tell NBC News there have been informal conversations at the staff level here about invoking the 25th Amendment. Former Chief of Staff John Kelly saying today he'd support the move. Lester.
All right, Kristen Welker tonight. Thank you. And on those calls to invoke the 25th Amendment, which would declare the president unfit to remain in office, just how realistic is that? We want to bring in Pete Williams now. Pete, what do we know about this?
Well, the calls have been growing, nearly all from Democrats, Lester, to use the 25th Amendment and make Mike Pence the acting president. 28 U.S. senators and 107 members of the House have called for it, including Chuck Schumer and House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. A president can be declared unable to carry out his duties if the vice president and at least 8 of the 15 cabinet secretaries agree. Highly unlikely now, with all of them Trump loyalists. Some members of Congress, though, worry that invoking the 25th Amendment would further inflame tensions. Lester?
All right, Pete Williams tonight. Thank you, Pete. And we're learning more about what happened inside the Capitol, including harrowing accounts of those trying to protect themselves. My colleague Savannah Guthrie, after a long evening anchoring coverage together last night, is there for us. Savannah, good evening.
Lester, good evening. And I was so struck by an interview I heard with a member of the press locked in the House chamber yesterday. She said she called her mom and said, "Don't worry, I'm in the safest place on earth." But as we know now, it was not.
24 hours later, as the sun sets on Washington, memories of that mob breaching the Capitol still haunting members of Congress who were there.
What I felt just 24 hours ago in the Capitol behind us is something that I haven't felt since I was in Afghanistan.
Congressman Jason Crow, a former Army Ranger, trapped inside the House gallery and comforting his colleague.
To think that as a member of Congress in 2021 in the U.S. Capitol on the House floor, that I was preparing to fight my way out of the People's House against a mob is just beyond troubling.
Fight your way out.
Yeah.
Did you snap back to that kind of mentality? What could I use? How would I get out?
Yeah, I did. I had a pen in my pocket and was thinking about how we were going to fight our way out.
Elsewhere, this stunning video of rioters breaking through doors and walking down the halls. All filmed by ITV correspondent Robert Moore.
They were intoxicated with the sense that they had kind of outwitted the Capitol Police, this sense that they had defeated, if you like, the Washington establishment.
Tonight, new images of protesters overwhelming police officers and the damage they left behind. This is where the Senate parliamentarian works. Senator Jeff Merkley tweeting this video of his ransacked office. And we're also learning more about the woman who was shot and killed by Capitol Police. Ashley Babbitt, seen here with a pro-Trump group heading toward the Capitol in this video obtained by TMZ. She was a decorated Air Force veteran who served in Iraq and Afghanistan. The officer who shot her has been placed on administrative leave pending an investigation. Meanwhile, members of Congress are now demanding answers about the massive security failure, with crowds able to overrun what's supposed to be one of the country's most secure buildings.
If this had been a military operation, all the commanders would have been instantly relieved of duty.
Savannah, it is so striking to hear from military veterans in Congress about their experiences.
Yeah, there are a lot of recent veterans who are now members of Congress who found themselves in that combat mindset again. One told us today, "I thought about, could I grab the Marine sword hanging in my office?" Battle mode in the last place they ever expected, Lester.
Yeah. All right. Savannah Guthrie in Washington. Thank you. There's late word the chief of Capitol Police is resigning as many members of Congress demand to know why the police were so outmanned by the huge mob. With more on that, here's Tom Costello.
The priority tonight for the FBI and D.C. police, finding the people who joined Wednesday's insurrection. Hundreds of officers and agents are now examining social media photos and video clips, asking the public, area hotels, and airlines for help.
These images depict individuals engaged in various acts of violence.
So far, prosecutors have brought charges against 55 suspects. 8 involve gun charges. One suspect arrested with a semi-automatic weapon and 11 Molotov cocktails. Another man has identified himself. 60-year-old Richard Barnett of Arkansas, pictured with his feet on a desk in Speaker Pelosi's office and holding one of her letters. Among the charges that prosecutors could press against the mob: trespassing, destruction of federal property, mail theft, federal rioting, assault on a police officer, federal gun charges, and insurrection. Today, the police union and members of Congress called for Capitol Police Chief Stephen Sund to step down.
There was a failure of leadership at the top of the Capitol Police, and I think Mr. Sund, he hasn't even called us since this happened.
In a statement, Chief Sund said the force was prepared for First Amendment protesters, but was met by assailants who attacked officers with metal pipes, discharged chemical irritants, and took up other weapons. Late today, Sund resigned. But Congress is demanding answers. Why weren't more Capitol Police officers deployed? Why weren't they wearing riot gear? And why did it take so long to request backup from D.C. police? Many asking why this video clip appears to show Capitol officers letting the mob through barricades.
I was stunned. Couldn't believe what I was watching.
Former NYPD Commissioner Bill Bratton.
I think clearly there's going to be a lot of blame to go around, and I think quite clearly a number of people will, in fact, lose their positions as a result of this.
Tonight, the FBI is investigating whether sensitive national security documents were stolen from the Capitol. When asked whether prosecutors may charge President Trump with encouraging the mob to storm the Capitol building, the DOJ said rather pointedly today, it is ruling nothing out. Lester?
Yeah, we see those new barricades in place tonight. All right, Tom, thanks. The police response to rioters at the Capitol is being compared to the more aggressive police responses we saw during last year's social justice protests. With more on that, here's Gabe Gutierrez.
When the rioters rampaged through the Capitol, communities of color couldn't help but notice something.
Suppose this had been a Black Lives Matter rally. Suppose this had been people of color storming the Capitol.
A large crowd of white demonstrators breaking into the hallowed halls of Congress. A stark contrast to the heavy militarized police response to the unrest after the deaths of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, when Kentucky State Representative Attica Scott was arrested herself.
To see in D.C. that white mobs were able to take over the Capitol building and then to have this slow response from law enforcement, I mean, that was extremely disturbing.
During the George Floyd protest, President Trump tweeted, "When the looting starts, the shooting starts." Yesterday,
Go home. We love you. You're very special.
This video of an officer posing for a selfie is also fueling anger.
No one can tell me that if had been a group of Black Lives Matter protesting yesterday, they wouldn't have been treated very, very differently.
We would have been met with tremendous force.
Wayne Carr-Maiden is a former member of D.C.'s National Guard.
It just shows that people are more privileged than other people, colored people. It's as simple as that.
Today, Michelle Obama described the difference in law enforcement responses as painful. Lester?
Gabe Gutierrez tonight. Thanks. The images of the Capitol have many people asking, how do we make sense of it and how do we explain it to our kids? Here's Kevin Tibbles.
The nation awoke and our flag was still there, but the aftershocks reverberate.
It's a nightmare. It's a nightmare.
From Chicago.
It's heartbreaking. It's disgusting.
It's ridiculous. It's a gross abuse of the system.
To Atlanta.
It's sad to watch our country almost being torn apart.
Headlines shout chaos, insurrection, siege. Words never associated with American democracy. And if adults are having trouble comprehending this, what are we telling our children?
I don't know how to put it to be honest.
Schools now prepare to explain. In Denver, they will offer counseling. In New Jersey, teachers pledge it to be their duty to prepare students on how government should function. And in Chicago, Episcopal priest Eric Atakis prays with parishioners and has this advice for parents.
You don't want to hide it, no. And you do want to make sure that they know that they are held close and safe.
Tonight, many are also holding close that beacon of hope, so many believe their nation still represents. Kevin Tibbles, NBC News, Chicago.
While most global leaders have reacted in horror, others are criticizing American values. Richard Engel is in London. How's this playing out, Richard?
Lester, this was an absolute gift for dictators and strongmen around the world, a way for them to show that they're no worse than the United States. A militia leader in Iraq, whose supporters in the past stormed Iraq's parliament, had his followers out on the streets denouncing what happened. The president of Zimbabwe, who himself came to power in a coup, said the U.S. no longer has the moral authority to criticize him. Iran said that what happened showed that the U.S. electoral system is flawed. Russia, which has a president for life, criticized what happened. So America's rivals saw an opportunity, and they're taking it.
Back with our NBC News investigation into the roots of the attack on the Capitol online. Stephanie Goss has more.
Extremist groups well known to law enforcement were calling for violence at the Capitol for weeks, according to an analysis done by Advanced Democracy, Inc. Accounts linked to the conspiracy group QAnon told supporters to arm themselves and declared January 6th Independence Day.
What we saw in the Capitol was really the internet come to life. So we saw Proud Boys, we saw QAnon people, we saw militiamen, all sort of convening at the president's call.
A number of rioters openly displayed symbols associated with militia groups and images embraced by white supremacists like the Crusader Cross and the Confederate flag. Police identified this man, a known QAnon conspiracy theorist, as a person of interest, and this man wearing a sweatshirt with a QAnon slogan. As recently as this fall, the Department of Homeland Security warned in its annual assessment that domestic violent extremists could mobilize quickly to threaten or engage in violence after the 2020 presidential election. In that same report, the agency called them the most persistent and lethal threat to the homeland.
The intelligence was there, that the threat was articulated and known. You have to ask yourself why those who counter the threat on the ground were not prepared to do so.
In other words, there were warnings. The storming of the Capitol should not have been a surprise. Stephanie Gosk, NBC News.
Up next, new clues into how COVID spreads. We're learning more tonight about why COVID may be spreading so fast. Here's Miguel Almaguer.
As a record number of Americans remain hospitalized, tonight a new JAMA study finds 59% of all COVID transmission comes from asymptomatic individuals. And now in San Diego County, an explosion of cases of the more contagious variant of the virus.
So your risk is actually greater today than it was the day before yesterday and the day before that.
With the National Guard deploying in hotspot states like Arizona and Mississippi to vaccinate healthcare workers, Los Angeles County remains the nation's epicenter.
None of us want it to be over more than the people working in our hospitals.
Outside L.A., Methodist Hospital activating crisis standards of care. Patients here may have limited options for care and should consider advanced health care directives like a do not resuscitate order. At some hospitals, triage teams have even identified COVID patients unlikely to survive, who could be taken off ventilators and moved out of the ICU to make room for others.
Tonight, this hospital may be the first in the area, but it likely won't be the last to initiate crisis standards of care. California is in need of a lifeline. Lester?
All right, Miguel, thank you. We'll be back with some final thoughts. Finally tonight, has it ever happened to you? Something traumatic happens, a close call behind the wheel, for example, and only later, after that initial shock, does it strike you and sink in just how close you came to disaster? That's the feeling I woke up with this morning. I suspect I'm not alone. As I swipe through more harrowing accounts from those who were inside the Capitol, scan new pictures and video clips that emerged overnight, yesterday's trauma suddenly became fresh again. I shuddered to think just how close to the edge our democracy teetered in a sustained violent spasm of pure and simple revolt and terror. The fact that it happened at a time our country is already at its most vulnerable, suffering under this soul-crushing pandemic, is not only un-American, it's cruel. And to think that it was all fanned by a campaign of lies and phony conspiracies from guardians of democracy simply rips your heart out. Democracy, however, prevailed in the wee hours of the morning. The electoral votes confirmed, and in 13 days we will have a new president, just as the framers intended. That's Nightly News for this Thursday. I'm Lester Holt. Thank you for watching, everyone. Please continue to take care of yourself and each other. Good night. Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.